Developed by FromSoftware, Dark Souls 2 is the highly anticipated sequel to the grueling 2011 breakout hit Dark Souls. The unique old-school action RPG experience captivated imaginations of gamers worldwide with incredible challenge and intense emotional reward. Dark Souls 2 brings the franchise's renowned obscurity and gripping gameplay innovations to both single and multiplayer experiences. Join the dark journey and experience overwhelming enemy encounters, diabolical hazards, and the unrelenting challenge that only FromSoftware can deliver. Hello and welcome back to the neighborhood, and welcome to the second episode of Dark Souls Month. We're trying something new this month. For the first 3 weeks of April, we'll be releasing episodes on Dark Souls, Dark Souls 2, and Dark Souls 3. After that, we'll be doing an episode where we rank all of the FromSoft games and discuss those rankings. And the final episode of April will be a community discussion of Souls-like games. So now, let's dive into the most divisive title in the trilogy, Dark Souls 2.
Dark Souls 2 is a 2014 action role-playing game developed by FromSoftware, the second installment of the Dark Souls series. It was released for Windows, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360. Taking place in the kingdom of Drangleic, the game features both player versus environment and player versus player gameplay. Dark Souls 2 was released in March 2014 after some initial delays, with the Windows version being released the following month. It was a critical and commercial success. A remastered version of the game, titled Dark Souls 2: Scholar of the First Sin, was released for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Windows in April 2015. It contained the original game and its downloadable content, with upgraded graphics, expanded online multiplayer capacity, and various other changes. A sequel, Dark Souls 3, was released in 2016.
For this series, we'll be tackling these games as if we were playing through them, taking the conversation one area/level at a time, and then discussing the boss at the end. This will allow us to cover the whole game while also keeping the conversation somewhat structured. Something you mentioned in your little blurb was them calling Scholar of the First Sin a remaster.
Yeah, I saw that and I was like, interesting.
It's like selling it short a little bit.
Yeah, it's I'm trying to like...
It's like a remix almost.
Yeah.
It's like a director's cut.
Yeah, like I was going to say, I think the closest thing that I can kind of compare it to is almost like a Resident Evil 2 remake, where it's the same game, but also there's a lot of differences, at least to my understanding,
right,
of how that worked. Because like it is still Dark Souls 2, and like they haven't, like they did add a little bit of like a new different storyline towards the end, but it is also very much the same. Like you're not playing a completely new game. I was unaware that there were even graphical updates to that, like other than the fact that like it was on the Xbox One, and I just assumed that like, yeah, the graphics look better because it is on Xbox One.
Oh no, they definitely tweaked it. They made the whole thing with Dark Souls 2, like the light and the dark, was way less extreme in Scholar versus the base game.
Yeah.
Like the darkness in the base game was much more like intense than it was in Scholar. But yeah, so we're going to do similar to what we did with Dark Souls 1. We're going to go through all of the areas of the game and the bosses. Probably we will be going less in depth and less of our general thoughts about Dark Souls as a series, because we got a lot of that out of the way in the first Dark Souls episode. So if you haven't checked that out, go listen to that one.
Yeah, for some reason you're like, I want to know about Dark Souls month, but only the second game. I'm gonna start there.
Yeah, and similar to the first one, this is going to be a open conversation, spoiler warning here for whatever that means for these games, whether it's bosses or story, whatever. We're not going to probably be breaking apart the story. If you need to know about that, go check out Vati Vidya on YouTube. But before we dive into the levels and the game proper, I think one of the most interesting things about Dark Souls 2 is that development and that why it's the black sheep of the trilogy, because Dark Souls 2 has this reputation of being the worst of the series, but then it's also kind of now that like cult classic of the series that like people have come back around on. And
it's kind of had the like Star Wars prequel glow up where a bunch of like people hated on those when they first came out, and now in general most people are like, hey, the prequels are pretty cool. Like the acting's a little weird. Like there are all these weird things about it, but they're pretty cool now.
Yeah, but we grew up with it, so we like it.
Yeah, and so I think you're seeing the same thing with Dark Souls 2, where it came out and there were a lot of big changes that we'll probably get into from like Dark Souls 1 to Dark Souls 2. Like there were a lot of things that it did differently, plus some other things. Like Miyazaki was not lead developer on it and that sort of thing. And so it was kind of like, this is different and I don't like it. And then I guess a lot of people, the angry video game nerds that complain about everything finally like moved on to something else. And now the discourse around Dark Souls 2 has become more positive.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how that happens. Yeah. So you mentioned Miyazaki wasn't like the lead developer. There are actually two other developers. I was reading about this a little bit in preparation for this episode, and they had somewhat different visions for what they wanted the game to be. And then one of them left the project, leaving the now single remaining lead director to try to pull it all together and release something. And Dark Souls 2 gets like the criticisms at it, I don't think are necessarily unwarranted. There's a lot of criticisms about the enemy placement and about level structure and about the not interconnectivity of the world that the first one had, and like sacrificing that for a more open type of world. And then the like a lot of the like the world, if you just look at the whole map of the world, doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And so there are, and then we'll talk about it, but some of the choices with like the torch and like, what is it, adaptability, the stat that you have, and like some of those decisions, like I get why there's criticism lobbed at this game. Personally, I've only played Scholar, and for me, this episode is going to be more of like reminiscing about that, because I started a new character and I played around in like the first area and beat the first boss and some of that stuff, but I really haven't played this game recently, so I can't speak to it the same way I was speaking about Dark Souls 1, where I just finished that. So this is going to be a lot more reminiscent for me. But I think Dark Souls 2 is a very interesting game because it has those kind of jagged edges and those...
Yeah.
They went for something and maybe it didn't all work out or pay off, but it is interesting to play through and talk about.
Yeah. Like there are some things that Dark Souls 2 did that changed up the formula. And like you said, not everything was successful, but then some of the things like we've seen sort of come back in later titles too, you know, like power stancing isn't like fully necessarily in Elden Ring, but like they've kind of like done paired weapons and stuff in like Elden Ring, which is sort of similar to like power stancing and having it sort of unlock a new moveset.
I was watching some Vati videos today and yesterday, kind of trying to get in the mindset for this game. And he was talking about the dragon that lives underground, and watching through that video and seeing like that underground level.
Yeah.
It's like, seems like they took that idea and really blew it out for Elden Ring.
Yep.
Because you have this entire underground world in Elden Ring. I actually, playing through Elden Ring, felt a lot of Dark Souls 2 vibes. And like Miyazaki, he did come back and he did Scholar. So he had left Dark Souls to go work on Bloodborne. And then after Bloodborne, he came back and helped them do Scholar. And so I'm not sure what changes he made or what he was involved in or how that shaped Scholar ended up being fundamentally still the same game. They just changed some things.
Yeah, because I was going to say, like, Scholar of the First Sin, like, it's a weird one because it's the same levels. It's the same game, but they've moved some enemies around. They've, like, put some new enemies in places they weren't in the because I've played both. And so, like, an example is, like, that first opening area in
the Forest of the Fallen Giants?
Yeah, Forest of the Fallen Giants. Like, you walk in there and there's like these big like ogre things in there. And it's like that was not in the base, like the original game. Like it was just the little soldier guys.
Gotcha.
And so it's like, oh, okay, well that's like a fun little difficult enemy that's just thrown at you right out of the gate.
That feels very Miyazaki because you have one of those in every other FromSoft game. You have the guy in Bloodborne in that little alley that you don't have to fight.
Yeah.
But you can, he's there.
Exactly. And so they did some of, like, they messed around with like enemy placement. They messed around with item placement, some of them. Because I know playing through the original game on the 360 pretty early on, in like maybe the second or third area of the game, you could get a ring that broke when you died, but it lets you keep all your souls.
Mm-hmm.
And so it kind of, I think it also protected you from like losing the
humanity or whatever that's in that game.
Yeah. And so like you could have that ring and it would break and then you could just repair it and keep using it over and over again. And like the repair cost would go up until eventually it hit a pretty high cap. So it wasn't going to necessarily like help you a ridiculous amount, but like they took where that ring was and they put something else there and they moved that ring somewhere else later on. And then they moved around, like there's a mechanic in Dark Souls 2 where you'll run into like these statues that are like blocking a door that you need to get in. And they have this like item in the game that you can use to unpetrify them. And so they moved around where some of those were. They put a few new ones in there, I think. And then they also moved around where like the branches were. So I think in the original game, if I'm remembering correctly, because it's been a while since I played the original game, you get to kind of like the hub and then there is like a petrified statue blocking something, but you can pretty easily find like one of those and just kind of decide I'm going to go this way versus this other way. But in Scholar of the First Sins, they've added some more things blocking doors so that you have to like it almost forces you to go through the areas in a different way. Like where you had more of a choice before of which way you wanted to go, I felt like Scholar of the First Sins was like, no, do this area before you do this other area because you have to get this item in order to unlock the next area. Versus, oh, I just ran in and grabbed it real quick and then like I could go do the other area. So there's a bunch of like little stuff like that they changed. And then like you said too, they had this mechanic where in the original game, like they played around with like light and darkness a lot. So you have like a torch that you can light from like bonfires, and then a lot of areas in the game are very, very dark. But they have like little things that you can, like braziers that you can light up and sort of move that light with you, so that I think the main thing was that like a lot of times you wouldn't be able to like lock on to enemies that were in the darkness. And so I think they changed that just in general in Scholar of the First Sins, or like maybe the lock on range was reduced a lot, but also like you legitimately had trouble seeing some of them in the original game versus Scholar of the First Sins. It was not as impactful to be in the darkness.
Yeah, I understand what they were going for with the torch mechanic. It's a weird choice. So like in every other game, the torch is just an item that you can just pull out. But in this one, you collect torches and they add to your like torch level.
Yeah, which very quickly becomes irrelevant because I think in my game currently I've got like an hour and a half of torch and I'm like, I'm never going to use an hour and a half of torch.
But so yeah, it adds to like your torch time, and then you can only light it at a bonfire, and then you carry it with you into the level. And yeah, it's on a timer, which you can add to by picking up torches. But just, yeah.
And if you put it away, it goes out.
It goes out.
So like there is like an item that you can use to like relight it out in the world, but like you have to find those or buy them or like farm them up. And so in theory, it's supposed to make you make kind of like a tough choice of like, do I want to be able to see where I'm going, or do I want to have a shield or something to protect myself? And like that part of it's pretty cool, but it's also like, and then they have some enemies that are like afraid of the light or whatever.
Yeah, the torch concept is I find it interesting. I don't love it actually playing the game.
Yeah,
but it's interesting. Another interesting choice was the adaptability stat, where the bread and butter of the combat gameplay for FromSoft games is iframes.
Yeah.
If you're not just tanking hits with heavy armor and a shield, you're trying to dodge through them. And to do that in this game, you have to level up a stat to a certain level in order for it to actually matter.
Yeah.
And that's such a weird... It's like they realized in Dark Souls 1, oh, people are taking advantage of this system. Let's force them to pay for that. Whereas in every other FromSoft game, it feels like they just designed it around that. They're like, okay, we'll make the enemies more aggressive, or the bosses, it'll
be harder to predict when you need to roll.
Yeah, we'll make them like, do their fake out swings and stuff. But in Dark Souls 2, they're like, no, we're just going to tie iframes to a stat.
And like, in theory, that's kind of cool. Like I can definitely
see...
Again,
it's interesting.
Yeah, like it's an interesting idea where it's like, okay, if I do want to just kind of be like a tanky, I have a shield and a sword man, like I don't really need to worry about the stat all that much. Like I still kind of do, but like I need to worry about my poise and my, just endurance way more than adaptability if I'm not planning on like rolling a whole lot through attacks. And then also it's like, if I really want to rely heavily on the rolls, maybe I can even put a few more points in, although it does kind of like fall off of the usefulness of that pretty quick. Yeah, it's got its
soft and hard cap.
So like the idea of it is interesting, but it's also like the cap where it becomes like the diminishing returns on it becomes so little that it's not even worth putting in is at like 23 or something like that, maybe 30. And so realistically, that amount of souls is pretty easy to get to level it up to that. And so it really ends up honestly just
feeling
making the
pointless.
Well, it just makes the first few areas harder because
that's what I was going to say is it makes the beginning of the game tougher.
Yeah. Like Dark Souls 2, more than any other of the Dark Souls games that I've played, is like, if you can get past like the first 3 areas, it's easy. It gets a whole lot easier just because your ability to play the game mechanically because of stats you have invested in makes it so that you can play the game a whole lot easier.
That's what I was realizing like when I started this new character. I was like, you know what? I played strength in Dark Souls 3. I played strength in Dark Souls 1. Let me roll dex. And
yep, I was also cocky.
I'm just getting destroyed because dex with no effective dodge it's brutal. Like I said, I managed to get to that like first boss, the like giant or whatever, and beat him and actually get some souls to spend. And so it was like I was starting to get to that point where it was feeling a little bit more like a normal Dark Souls game. But I can definitely see how people coming from 1 and then people like going back to this one after playing other FromSoft games would like, there's definitely a shift there that you have to make. It definitely feels, and this is something that I kind of getting into like the areas and our actual, walkthrough of the game. Something I noticed as you boot up the game, you watch the intro cutscene, you go to the things betwixt, which is kind of like your first little area before you get into the hub, and it has a not completely, but it has a different vibe than the other 2 Souls games. It feels like it was made by a different director. Like
Yeah.
there's just a different
It feels a lot more dreamlike almost to me.
dreamlike and almost like even more. And once you get into the game, you realize, oh no, this is still pretty obtuse and whatever. But like the first section, like the cutscene, they're explaining things very clearly to you. And then you go into a hut with the 3 old ladies and you sit there for a good 5 minutes while they explain to you about souls and your adventure and what you're doing there, what you're going to go do. And it's like, there's so much more exposition here than you get from probably the other 2 games combined, at least in the like intro.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And then it has like the tutorial area is like I know that like you can probably find a breakdown on YouTube of how just like awesome the tutorial zone is for Dark Souls 1. You know, similar to like how people are like, oh, the whole first level of Mario, like World 1-1 is like all designed to teach you how to play the game. I'm sure that exists for like Dark Souls 1 as well. But this game legitimately is just like, hey, here's a room. In this room, you're going to learn how to parry. In this room, you're going to learn how to backstab. In this room, you're going to learn how to lock onto enemies.
Which is another thing, again, tying it to Elden Ring. I got the vibes in Elden Ring when you drop down in that hole. You go through this same kind of thing of like, in this room, you're going to learn how to crouch. And in this room, you're going to learn how to backstab and parry and fight bosses. And we're going to teach you the mechanics cave by cave. And it's going to look a lot prettier. And you're going to be like on cloud 9 playing through it for the first time, but it was essentially what they did in Dark Souls 2.
Yeah, it is definitely very, very similar to what that was, because like Dark Souls 1 and 3, it's just kind of like you wake up in a graveyard and go deal with it, I guess. Like,
yeah, and then you make your way out of the tutorial area and you end up in Majula, which is your hub, which is simultaneously one of my favorite hubs and one of the weirdest.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because, like, revisiting it, you have the little house you can explore. Everything's kind of spread out, which is a little awkward. You have pigs that can one-shot you.
Early on, yeah.
Yeah, and then it barely feels like a hub.
Yeah.
Like it's just kind of this open area with a few houses. And then eventually there's the blacksmith and a few other like NPCs and stuff.
A blacksmith shows up, like old lady vendor shows up, the blacksmith's daughter shows up at some point. Some other like petrified lady shows up. I think she's like a pyromancer. You have the other vendor who like sits upstairs and gets progressively ruder the more stuff that you buy from him.
Yeah.
There's a cat.
Yes.
That sells you things.
There's a well you can drop down eventually once you get the cat ring.
Well, it's a lot. I don't know. It just felt like it was a lot nicer than most other. Like it wasn't. It was kind of like a ruined sort of villagey thing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was very much just like, look,
it's on the coast.
It's a nice, like, it's on these cliffs. You're looking out over this nice, beautiful sunset.
Yeah.
And like, you know, the Dark Souls 1 area is just like, it's a hub.
It's a decrepit ruin.
Here's the graveyard over here. And here's a bunch of things that want to kill you. And then like Dark Souls 3 was like, it's kind of just a bigger version of that burned out hub from the first one.
I think that why it feels so almost out of place to me is that it just kind of feels like another piece of the world.
Yeah.
Which I guess is similar to Firelink, but even Firelink kind of feels separated from the world in that it's like on this little precipice or whatever. Bloodborne is completely separate from the world. Firelink Shrine in 3 is basically completely separate from the world. Sekiro it's
kind of connected.
It's connected, but it's like until you unlock the little shortcut to the castle, you don't really see how it's part of the world. It feels like it's off in its own little corner. And then Demon Souls is like Bloodborne. It's a completely separate like plane.
Yeah.
So
and Elden Ring is confusing because it is both separate.
You don't know.
You can find the literal place in the world, but no one is there.
Well, yeah, and that's how like Bloodborne is.
Mm-hmm. True.
It's like a mystical representation of a real world place, but the real world place has long since been abandoned.
I want you to know that I'm doing everything in my power during during Dark Souls month to keep playing the Dark Souls so that they're fresh on my mind and not just go play Bloodborne. So
I know I've been playing a lot of Elden Ring, so that's why I keep like tying back to that because I'm like, I've been feeling the itch to go to Bloodborne too. I'll probably boot up another file, but so Majula. 90% of the reason why it's so great is the music.
Yeah, it does have very like chill, calm, like
it's got that music that when you hear it in just like a video game music to study to compilation or whatever, it immediately hits you in the gut and takes you right back to that place, and you're like, that was a good game. I have fond memories of this music. It's like it's just something about it, and I think FromSoft is really good at impactful music.
Yeah,
especially in their hubs and stuff where you're going back there all the time.
Yeah. And it's got like a sort of like melancholy piano situation going on. And it's nice. It's nice.
So then the game starts for real. You head into your first actual zone, which you can go a couple different directions, but we're going to go kind of in a specific order following these guides. And the first one is the Forest of the Fallen Giants. Yeah,
like the Forest of the Fallen Giants is definitely the de facto, like this is meant to be the first zone. You can technically run a different way. But
I can't remember if I played on my first playthrough. I know I went the other direction first.
Yeah, because the other direction is way more obvious.
Yeah, that's the Hyde's Tower, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say I went that way and maybe even finished that area first. Because I feel like I had a much easier time with Forest of the Fallen Giants on my first playthrough than I'm having on this like replay I'm doing. And I think that's because I powered my way through Hyde's first.
Yeah, and then I was like, oh, this is so much easier.
Yeah, and then the Forest was like, oh, wow, these are babies over here. And
because a lot of Hyde's is like these big, massive dudes, and you get to Forest of the Fallen Giants, and it's mostly just like...
It's just a lot of
regular
little guys.
Soldiers.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this is a whole lot easier. In the original game, there used to be like a... Like in Hyde, you could run in real quick and very quickly grab a 100% block shield, which this game does not give you until way later. Like I think you have to get past both Forest of the Fallen Giants, Hyde's, and No Man's Wharf to get a 100% shield. And so it's like a lot tougher, but there was just one like in the pathway between Majula and Hyde's originally. Or maybe it wasn't quite 100. Maybe it was like a 95 shield or something. Right. It was still a lot better than like most of the stuff that you would start with. But yeah, Forest of the Fallen Giants you run into, it kind of leads you through this area with a bunch of just regular enemies. And then eventually you hit this point where it splits off a little bit. Like there's a like you can drop down here zone with like these fire breathing lizards and stuff.
Yeah, it actually goes, there's quite a few different directions once you kind of reach the bonfire inside. I think they all kind of end up interconnecting and being like, oh, I see how this led to here. But yeah, and a lot of them you can just kind of ignore to get to the boss, or you have to get to the boss to get a key that will let you open up some of the additional ones.
Yeah, exactly. But they also introduce a few of the like concepts that they'll keep using over and over again. So like one of the concepts is there's a point in the level where you have found like your midpoint bonfire basically, and then you kind of go back through, you have to fight your way kind of around. And then there's some like explosive barrels that are just piled up. And there's a conveniently placed like soldier that's just throwing bombs at you. And if you're good, maybe you dodge enough. But if you're like most people who are going to play this game, he blows up a wall, which creates a shortcut. And there are multiple places in this game where you need to like blow something up in order to unlock a shortcut or like a new zone. Which is like a weird... I don't really remember that being a thing in Dark Souls 1 at all.
No, there were just hidden walls.
Yeah.
You know how many times I hit the wall with my sword next to that bonfire, remembering that it opened up and being like, how does this work again? And then when I went and explored the levels, like, oh, the barrels. Yes, now it's coming back to me.
Yes, the barrels explode. Which is also just a weird thing, too, because it was like, if for some reason you managed to dodge and the guy didn't blow up the barrels anyway, you could like break the barrels and not have them there to blow up, and then you have to reload the area in order to like get that shortcut.
Or you could
open.
go up and kill the guy.
Yeah.
Which you probably, that's where they drop that first night on you.
Because that's the other thing that they introduce is the pursuer, who was in a lot less of the game in the original version. Like there have been so many more places, like when I've played through Scholar of the First Sin, where I'm like, oh shoot, like the pursuer's here. Because it's never like a fun time when he shows up. He is basically like this big, massive armored dude with a massive sword and curse powers. They'll just randomly like spawn into your world, usually in places you've cleared already or just very inconvenient places.
Yeah, and if you can parry well and you can bait out like their dash attack and learn it, they're not terrible. But the problem is early game, again, it's kind of like that thing of, you technically can kill this guy, but you're not meant to.
Yeah.
Like even if you can parry him or you can hit him or whatever, you're not doing the right, like the amount of damage you need to effectively kill this enemy. Yeah,
exactly. There is a place in Forest of the Fallen Giants where you do eventually, like, you can go in and like fight him as an actual boss.
Yeah.
But they set it up so that there are like these ballista that you shoot. And so the way that they want you to kill him is get him to like charge you in front of the ballista, run real quick, shoot the ballista at him and kill him that way.
Which is janky. It does not feel good.
No.
Like they should not have tried to do these puzzle bosses.
Yeah, because the ballistas also break. And so like if he hits the ballista trying to hit you, it's broken. And then you're just like, well, I guess I'm going to die now.
Yeah, I definitely still am a fan of Dark Souls 2. But I think a lot of my fondness from it over the other two games was partially due to the fact that I had only really played 1 and 3 co-op with you for the most part. So like 2 was my Dark Souls solo, like learn the game experience. And now that I've had the experience of playing 1 and 3 at my own speed and doing things solo, like I have a better appreciation for them. I don't like 2 any less. I just feel like I like 1 and 3 a little bit more now.
Yeah.
And so, again, like I said in the beginning, I think 2's rough edges make it interesting, but some of the rough edges shine out a little bit more now.
And 2 has a special place in my heart just because it was like my first real Dark Souls.
Yeah.
Like I had played Dark Souls 1 with my buddy Chris, but then like it was like spring break or right before spring break or something. And Dark Souls 2 was coming out. And so we were like, let's just go get it at midnight for a midnight launch at GameStop when they still did that. And so we like brought home Dark Souls 2 and just played it basically all spring break.
Nice.
And that was like the first one that I like went all the way through and beat. Because I had played a bunch of Dark Souls 1, but I had never like gotten to the end of it. I'd always just kind of fallen off. And so this was like the first one that I played and then like ran through several new games doing it. Knew the like original release of it on the 360 a whole lot better than I know Scholar of the First Sins, because Scholar of the First Sins does change a lot. But yeah, it's definitely the criticisms of 2. I definitely am like, yeah, that's fair. That's fair if some of these things didn't work or, you know. And I'm definitely probably a bit more lenient with Dark Souls 2 just because it was like, this is the one I would consider myself to have really kind of like learned Dark Souls from. And then 1 and 3 I completed like after beating 2.
So the boss of the Forest of the Fallen Giants, which I think Forest is a pretty good like starting zone as far as like feeling very Dark Souls, having a lot of like looping paths and shortcuts and doors to unlock and secrets to find. There are a few like just gank areas that there's that one room you walk by and you just get pelted by ballistas.
Yep.
But outside of that, I think it's a pretty good area.
Yeah.
The boss is the last giant. Also the pursuer, which you mentioned, but like kind of the main boss
Is the last giant.
the one you need to fight to progress, right? Because you're supposed to kill like four big bosses in order to like kind of move the story forward.
Yes, but I don't know that the last giant is one of them.
Oh, okay. I know he gets like his little opening cutscene thing before you go in there. But
Yeah, he gets an opening cutscene. I forget why you end up having. I feel like he dropped a key or something.
he does drop a key that like lets you explore more of the forest.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know that he was actually ever like required to like progress the
the
like I
game.
think you can skip him entirely cuz you can get to the Lost Bastille, which is where one of the like Lord Souls or whatever they're called is, by beating the pursuer boss who's there in Forest of the Fallen Giants, and then you can, like you said, you can just kind of skip directly to Hyde's Tower, which also takes you to Lost Bastille. I think the best thing that I can compare it to is that Forest of the Fallen Giants is similar to, what's the area south of Limgrave in Elden Ring?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's still part of like the Limgrave area, but yeah, what is...
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But like where that whole area is not really like you could play through the entirety of Elden Ring and just never go there because it's not technically required.
Yeah.
And I think that's what Forest of the Fallen Giants is. Like you should go there because it unlocks a vendor that's going to come to your town and sell you unlimited life gems. It unlocks an option to go into the Lost Bastille, completely skipping like No Man's Wharf area. And it also does definitely feel like an intro area, but it's not. I don't think it's ever actually like, you do have to come there later on in the game when you have to collect giant souls, but you don't. I don't think it's like the Lost Giant himself is not one of the lords.
You mentioned life gems, and that reminds me of another thing that they changed there. Of you have your Estus flask for your health, but you only start out with a few of them, like one. I think I have 3 now in my new playthrough, and they are so slow.
Yeah, like it's not an insta heal. Not that I guess Dark Souls 1 and 3 are, but it's...
No, but they're a lot closer to it. Like it's a whoop, health filled up, whereas like this is like a slowly filling up. And it also takes a while for your character to actually physically drink it.
And I think you have to full stop to drink it too. And I don't remember if that was a thing in 1 and 3.
No, you could definitely walk in 3 for sure.
Yeah.
But they also have a item that you can, like a consumable item that you can buy called life gems that will heal you as well.
Yeah. And that's usually a lot. It's a quicker animation, and it's like a regen thing. So like the regen thing is slower than like drinking your Estus, but it's also like it lasts longer than your Estus.
Yeah.
So like you can kind of like turn on regen for like 5 seconds or something like that. And so it allows you to kind of like take a hit and still keep regenning.
Kind of reminded me of like blood vials.
Yeah.
Or the grasses from Demon Souls. In Demon Souls, you have various grasses of various strengths. And so like by the end game, some of the early grasses are just like useless. It's kind of like potions in an RPG where it's like the base potion is like basically useless by the end game. And then in Bloodborne, you have your blood vials, which are a consumable item that scales with you. But when you run out, you have to go farm them. It's like one of the kind of weak points of Bloodborne. And this was kind of gave you both. Like you have Estus, but it's a lot more precious. at least early on. And so to supplement it, you have your consumable healing items.
Exactly. And like you can see that impact even in their future titles, because I'm trying to remember Dark Souls 3. I forget exactly how it worked. I think you had to you didn't start with as many as you could have.
No, you didn't. You had to upgrade your Estus. You got Estus shards in 3.
Yeah, which
would
gave you
more
like,
Estus.
Because like Dark Souls 1 was...
It was based on the bonfire.
Yeah, you either had 5 or 10 or 20.
Yeah.
Whereas Dark Souls 2, it's like you started with like 1 or 2, and then like you
added more.
And you can see that they stuck with that system in Dark Souls 3 and in Elden Ring, where it's like in Elden Ring you start with 3 and then eventually you work your way up to like 15 or whatever it is, 20.
And Sekiro was like that with the gourd, right?
Yeah. You have found like seeds randomly throughout the world, which gave you more uses.
You would give Emma your seed.
Yeah. It's always a weird phrasing translation thing. But yeah, so like I think how the Estus worked is a good example of like not everything that they changed was bad. Like a lot of things that they did
carried forward
were carried forward in this game,
So after you finish the Forest of the Fallen Giants, the next area here is Hides, which we've already kind of referenced, and this is a much more like the castle-y side of Dark Souls with the big knights and stuff. A lot of slow-moving, hard-hitting enemies. There are 2 bosses here, I think. Like, this is only listing the old Dragon Slayer, but that's like the main boss. But isn't there the one where you can like pull the levers to affect his platform?
Yes. There is also the Dragon Rider. So the old Dragon Slayer.
One of them is like a character coming back from 1, right?
Yes. So he basically it's
Ornstein, isn't it?
Yeah, Ornstein comes back.
Yeah.
And he is like guarding like a side area. He's guarding like the Blue Cathedral or something like that.
Yeah.
And so he is completely optional. Also, in the original, I don't think there was the dragon there. I think it was just Ornstein. I don't think you had to fight the dragon. I can't remember.
Yeah, the dragon's tough.
So that's a change.
What a slap in the face to one of the hardest bosses in Dark Souls 1 to make him this like early game, not quite pushover, but much easier boss in this game.
Well, and I don't know that he's easier. I think it's just
he's by himself.
Yeah, I think it's just like, hey, so really Ornstein and Smough were not that tough individually. It's just when there are 2 of them trying to kill you, it sucks.
Or when they're by themselves and they have either they have the effect of their partner.
Yeah.
It also, like, I'm sure lore-wise, it plays into like cyclical nature and time and all that stuff that is very interesting to dive into. But so you explore this area. It's a pretty straightforward zone. Like the difficulty comes in the enemies, I feel like, because a lot of these enemies hit like trucks.
Yeah, but for the most part, you can kind of like...
You can run.
Well, yeah, you can run pretty easily, and you can kind of like peel them off like one by one.
Pull them apart, yeah.
Yeah.
So then after you fight...
So the gimmick of this area is that, like you kind of mentioned earlier, there's a bunch of levers that you can pull. And so the boss arena is initially like this big round circular thing. But then when you fight the boss of this area, if you've pulled all of the levers, you have essentially made the boss arena very, very small.
Yeah, so are you trying... I couldn't remember. You're trying to raise the platforms to give you more room to fight?
Yes.
Or you're trying to lower them so that you could knock him off?
I think it's probably you raise them.
I think you're raising them, but if you're like a Dark Souls 2 like badass, you could run in and fight him on the little platform and hope to knock him off. I think that's the thing. Because
he can get knocked off, or at least he could.
Yeah. I think he still can in Scholar, but
I was gonna say,
you can
in the
get
original,
knocked off as well.
Yeah, in the original you could like get a bunch of arrows and just snipe him. So from like across the way you could just shoot him to death.
Nice. It's not a Dark Souls game if you can't cheese with arrows.
Exactly.
So yeah, then after you end up beating him, you move on to this has Cathedral of the Blue next.
That's Ornstein's spot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Is
then
there stuff in there?
I don't really remember. We don't have to spend a lot of time on it because we have a lot of games still to go. But
I think it unlocks a covenant. So
gotcha.
Because that was something that they kind of blew out in this one too.
A lot of covenants.
Was they added a bunch of covenants, and the Cathedral of the Blue one was the like, I want to go help people who are being invaded covenant. And so they would give you a ring, and if you wore the ring, because you could also wear 4 rings in this one. I think Dark Souls you could only wear like 2 or something like that.
Yeah.
So you could wear 4 rings, and so if this was one of the rings that you chose, I think it gave you like a health boost. But it also like made it so that you could be summoned into the world. Like there's the protectors of the blue, and then the like I'm just a little guy blue people. And so in Majula you get the like please come save me blue ring, and then this one gives you the like I will come save you ring. And so essentially whenever somebody wearing the save me ring would get invaded, it would summon from a random pool of everyone wearing the I will come save you ring, which is kind of cool, you know, like it's they played a lot with like the PvP side of things in this one for sure.
It's another mechanic that they've carried forward because 3 had a lot of covenants like that, and Elden Ring. Like in Elden Ring, I love having the item that lets me get summoned into other people's worlds because it's fun to show up to usually a pair of people co-oping and be the third person to help try to beat down an invader.
Yep.
Sometimes you end up in a weird situation where like they're trying to lure people in and you've been pulled into a weird trap. That's happened to me like recently, but
yeah, where they're like, no, we brought you here to fight for our entertainment or whatever, and it's like, no.
Yeah, those are kind of odd, but like I do like the way the covenants kind of play with each other, and 2 kind of started that, and 3 carried it, like they've carried it forward since and kind of changed it and adapted it. I guess that kind of makes sense how Bloodborne's PvP was a little lackluster.
Yeah.
Because it was made essentially alongside Dark Souls 2. It was just different visionaries working on the same kind of idea at the same time. So yeah, it's interesting to think about.
Yeah, because I forget that Bloodborne has PvP.
You get invaded in like 2 zones. That's it. And like co-oping, you and I know it can be kind of a headache to get connected into each other's worlds. And yeah, it definitely, I'm not really mad that invasions aren't that big of a part of Bloodborne, but yeah, it definitely feels that a game that technically came after Dark Souls 2 in the in like the chronology seems like a step backwards as far as like multiplayer. But so then you end up in No Man's Wharf.
One of my least favorite zones in this game.
One of my favorite zones thematically. Like it's piratey and it's like a bay harbor kind of thing. But yeah, didn't really necessarily, I don't remember hating it, like exploring it, but also it feels like one of those zones where the darkness played a lot bigger part in the original game, because I don't feel like I remember it being kind of dark in my playthrough, but not to the point of being like, well, I can't see anything. But
yeah, my main problem with it is just that there is only one bonfire.
True, it's
in the zone,
that type of thing.
And it like they throw a lot of encounters at you that are like, here's 6 dudes trying to beat you up.
A classic Dark Souls 2 complaint.
Yeah, where and they also have like a bunch of these like big hand monster things. Like they're like sort of like monkey looking things, but they have very long arms with massive hands. But they're scared of fire. And so it plays with that mechanic where it's like you pretty much have to have a torch unless you just want to get your ass handed to you at a certain part of the level so that you can like scare them away. But yeah, the annoying part is just that this is the zone where I felt the most like, I don't have enough adaptability. I don't have enough Estus yet. I don't have enough.
I can't get out of a sticky situation.
Yeah, like I need all of my resources, and anytime I take a hit, it's like, ugh, I'm burning these resources. Because that was another thing that Dark Souls 2 did differently that we haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah.
Is that when you die, not only does it, like in Dark Souls 1, it was like you could be human, which did give you like a little bit of extra health and stuff, I think.
Yeah, you got a health boost, and then you got better item discoverability.
But like you had like, this is my main amount of health. And then it was like a boost when you became human. In Dark Souls 2, you start human, and then every time you die, it takes a little chunk off your health, and it keeps taking that little chunk off your health until like it hits around half of your health bar, maybe a little bit less. And so every time you die, not only are you losing your souls that you have to go run back to, and you've burned some of your consumable health items maybe or whatever, but also you have less life to use now.
Unless you want to burn the like humanity item.
Yeah. Which like you can farm up and whatever. It's not like it's a limited resource or whatever, but you know, it's still, and it does encourage you to co-op, because if you go into someone else's world and help them co-op, and you either defeat enough, it's the co-op in 2 is based on the number of souls you collect. So like most of the time that means that you're just going to like help them beat the boss, and then it'll like disconnect you. And then you'll be human again. But it could also, like if they're just clearing out every single enemy, you could also just collect enough souls and be returned to your world that way and become human. And so like it does encourage you to co-op in a weird way, because it's like, hey, you could burn this consumable item, or you could just help somebody kill things, and then you could become human that way. But it is like a very weird, again, not bad. I didn't hate it. I think they balanced it out with the fact that once you kill an enemy in Dark Souls 2 like 10 or 15 times, it stays dead. It doesn't respawn.
That's a lot though.
Yeah.
I don't think I really ever experienced that playing through the game, because that would mean dying a lot in a zone, and usually your deaths come from bosses.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about the mechanic is it's kind of a throwback to Demon Souls, where when you were in like spirit form, you had half health.
Yeah.
And when you were human, you had full health. It's a mechanic I'm glad hasn't carried forward. I'm glad that Bloodborne didn't have it as being kind of a spiritual, like not spiritual successor, but like feeling the closest to a Demon Souls sequel we've got. And then, yeah, like Dark Souls 3 decided to go the like, here's your base health, and then here's the buff you get with an ember. And then Elden Ring,
same thing.
Yeah, you just get bonuses if you use a rune arc, but those, like, nobody uses rune arcs in Elden Ring. It's like very rare that you pop one of those.
Yeah, I think I popped one for Melania.
Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to use them a little bit more on my current playthrough, just because I'm like, I never used these before. I might as well try to use them, but yeah.
Yeah, I was a hoarder and I had like 47 at the end of the game. I guess I should burn some.
Exactly. Yeah. I may try to save some for the DLC, but yeah.
It's an interesting, weird mechanic. And I guess I noticed it the most in this area because the run is so long. And so like even if you open the shortcut that it has a slightly more direct route to the boss, like there are still some enemies that you run past every time. And so like there's definitely the like, oh, these enemies aren't spawning anymore. I guess the boss has killed me like 8 times. So
so the boss for this area is the Flexile Sentry.
Yeah.
Which is a cool design.
Yeah.
It's like double-sided, right?
Yeah, so like, one side has like these 2 scimitars, and one side has like these 2 maces, and
it's like, oh, you like to backstab? Sorry.
Yeah.
Not an option.
Yeah. But only one side attacks at a time. So if you go in there co-op,
right,
one side is attacking and that person can just kind of like dodge or block, and then the other person can get some free hits in on like the side that is not attacking. So it's like and the entire time you're fighting in like a pirate ship thing.
Yeah.
And it is slowly filling up with water, which once it reaches a certain point, you can't move quickly anymore. So it was kind of like a twofer sort of fight.
Yeah. one of the things, another complaint about Dark Souls 2 is that it just has quantity over quality of bosses. But there are a few kind of like that one that have like some interesting mechanics to them.
Yeah. Yeah. So you beat him, and at that point, you can sail the ship to the next zone, which is the Lost Bastille. Like we said earlier, you could also get to the Lost Bastille from the Forest of the Fallen Giants if you beat the Pursuer boss there. You can get picked up by an eagle and flown there. And you come in at 2 different areas. So, like, if you want to see, like, there's a locked door that you can only get through if you do the Pursuer fight and you get picked up by the eagle. And then you can kind of, like, open up this other part of the zone.
I know I did the Pursuer fight.
Yeah.
I can't remember how I ended up here the first. I feel like I saw both directions.
Yeah, I think we came back and did the Pursuer fight.
Maybe that's what happened.
Because I think I remember doing the Pursuer fight co-op with you.
Okay. So if you come in from the first time, that's where you like come in on that like bridge. You're like walking in across the bridge, and then you can like get the skeleton to roll the thing down and break the wall for the bonfire.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's how I first got there.
I think.
Because the eagle drops you off in like a tower, right?
Yes.
Or do I have those backwards?
Maybe. It's a tower, but the tower is also connected to a bridge. Did the guy who rolls the explosive, did you approach him from the back or the front? Like, did he roll it down at you, or did he roll it down? And
he rolled it down at me.
Yeah. Okay. So you got there with the ship the first time then.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, because that's, you get there, you run through, you have to get this guy to like blow up a wall so that you can have
a bonfire.
Yeah. In a convenient place. And then you have to like go through a little bit more, and then there's the first like enemy or the first like petrified statue that you have to wake up, which wasn't there in the original game. You could just walk into it in the original game. So you unpetrify the guy, and you get this miserable gank fight where just all of these enemies charge you once you open that door. And then if you've survived all of that, you get the privilege of fighting one of my least favorite bosses in this game. The Ruined Sentinels. It is 3 big, tall dudes with hammers and shields. You drop into this very tiny platform and fight one. And if you can manage to fight him on the platform, the other 2 leave you alone until you've killed him. But if you fall off the very tiny platform, which is extremely likely because
I remember this.
It is very tiny, and he does a lot of moves that could knock you off. Then the other 2 jump down and gank you. And it's miserable. I hate it. It reminds me of Shadows of Yharnam, which is another boss fight that I hate.
I feel like it's vice versa. Shouldn't Shadows remind you of this?
Well, I mean, true. Yes. But this is...
You don't like fighting 3 things at once.
I don't like it when they just artificially ramp up the difficulty by being like, we're just going to have 3 things attacking you. Like, that doesn't feel fair. In which, like we talked about last time, one of the things I like about Dark Souls is it feels fair most of the time. Like, most of the time when you're losing to a boss, it's like, I know what I did. Versus this, where it's just like, that was bullshit.
Yeah, getting stuck into a corner by like 3 enemies, or just having there's a lot more RNG when you're fighting like 2 or 3 enemies. I think that's where the difficulty comes in, because you can't predict how the AI is going to react. Whereas like if it's you one-on-one, that's why, I mean, even with just regular enemies in Souls games, the strategy is, that's why they give you rocks or daggers or whatever, is to like try to pull them one at a time, because you can react to one and make it like a fair fight. But then in a boss, like you may get a boss attempt where 2 of them just like derp out and don't do anything, and you're able to kind of clear them out one by one. It's like, oh, that was great. Sometimes they're all hyper aggressive on you, and there's just nothing you can do.
And there is a summon that you can bring in for this fight that like does it is, they're weak to it, and so like that summon will do a bunch of damage if
feel
you
like
can keep the summon alive.
I feel like I had the summon.
Yeah.
Because I don't remember struggling with this one, maybe like 2 or 3 attempts, but
Yeah.
I definitely brought the summon in.
Yeah. The other thing that sucks is the run to this fight, because the shortcut is you open a door in a wall that you have to like jump across a chasm to get into.
And jumping was not good in FromSoft games until
Elden Ring.
Sekiro and Elden Ring.
Yeah. And so like half the time you're trying to run back, you just die because you don't hit the like pixel you're supposed to land on. So it was not like that part just made it even extra annoying because it was just kind of like, all right, like, come on.
Yeah.
But yeah, you kill this guy and then you progress to Sinner's Rise, which really wasn't that bad of an area. I didn't think. Like the worst part of it is eventually like you're walking through water, which slows you down.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Like you got to go through the basement and it's kind of like flooded or whatever.
Yeah.
But it wasn't terrible.
No, I was kind of combining these two areas, I think, in my mind.
Yeah,
because they're similar in like aesthetic. But yeah, no, not. I don't remember it being too bad.
No, and it was a pretty short area, Sinner's Rise. Like it wasn't.
And
super
this is
extensive.
Where you end up fighting like the real boss that you need to fight.
Yes. And this was one of the ones that I felt like a lot different from base game to this, because in the base game, there was the room that you fight it in is super dark.
Yeah.
And so there's like this whole process that you have to go through. You either have to like bring in your own torch to fight it so that you can like kind of see where he's at, or there's a process that you can go through to like light up the room. But then I think we did it like when you were playing through it, and it was like, oh well, this
you don't
really
even have to light up the room.
Yeah, like you can see where he's at without lighting up the room, and so that was part of their like walking back some of the dark and light mechanic.
Yeah,
and that is your first Lord Soul or Boss Soul or whatever. Like this is the first one that is one of the required ones.
Yeah, I think in this game she tells you the maiden or whatever she's called in Majula tells you to go fight like 4 kings or something.
Yeah.
So this would be like the first king. And then yeah, you go from there to Belfry Luna, which also kind of aesthetically feels like
this.
A connection to these areas.
Yeah. And this was again them playing with PvP. Because the Belfry Luna is one of the ones where, like in Dark Souls 1, there was, I think, just a single area in the game where you could join a covenant, wear a ring, and if somebody just entered that zone, it didn't matter if they were like human or not, you would invade them. And so this is one of the areas in Dark Souls 2 where it's like you can join the like covenant of the Belfry Protectors or whatever. And so anytime anyone is just trying to run through this area, you can just be summoned into this area to mess up their life.
Fun.
And on the one hand, that's kind of cool, especially like when I played it at launch and it was just kind of like this constant, like every time you were running into like new people who were fighting. That was kind of cool. Now, when you do it, if you run into people and it's not just summoning like NPCs, if you run into real people, it's like they're good at the game because they're still playing Dark Souls 2.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, I want to be in this covenant. Versus like at launch when it was just kind of like random people with 0 build.
They're just like, what does this ring do? And then they're like, oh, I guess I get summoned here. Yeah. I feel like when I played through it, I was dealing mostly with NPCs going through here. I remember it being pretty active as far as like summon signs and stuff going on in Dark Souls 2. I don't know if there was like a revisiting Dark Souls 2 kind of thing happening. I remember being surprised how much activity was still going on in the game. But for this era, I don't remember being like frustrated by invaders.
Yeah, because if you get the NPCs in this game were not like super great at
No,
fighting.
In 1 and 2, not bad. Like I feel like Bloodborne And 3, like the NPC and hunter invaders and stuff like that, they feel a lot more like people.
And then your reward for getting to the end is, hey, did you remember that gargoyle fight from Dark Souls 1? What if you did it again, but there were 3 of them?
Yeah. I remember this fight. I don't remember it being, even though there were 3 of them, maybe we did it co-op. I don't remember it being like super challenging.
Yeah. I don't think it was either. Even if you didn't do it co-op, I don't think it was ridiculous because I want to say they were like staggered in coming out again.
Yeah.
And then also like once you've seen the gargoyle fight, it's kind of no longer surprising. And you're like, oh, okay. Like I know what to do here.
Yeah. And they did it in Demon Souls. They did it in Dark Souls. They did it in Dark Souls 2. Kind of surprising that they didn't do it in 3.
Yeah. I was trying to think through. I'm like, I guess they did not do it in 3.
They did it in Elden Ring, sort of, with the
twin gargoyles.
The twin gargoyle things.
Yeah, those gargoyles are no joke. Those guys hurt. These ones are like pushovers compared to those Elden Ring gargoyles.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So you beat the gargoyles, and then
and that's a completely optional zone. Like you don't have to go into that at all. I think you get there through a Pharaoh's Lockstone, which is something that we haven't talked about.
Another thing they kind of brought back for Elden Ring.
Yeah, and so it functions similarly to the Stone Sword Key in Elden Ring, if you're familiar with that. But it's like a consumable item that there are a bunch of like these locked doors, and you can pick like, I want to use it here or there. And
sometimes it's super worth it, and sometimes it's like, what a waste.
Exactly.
Why did I open this door?
Exactly.
And there's a lot of them in Dark Souls 2.
Yeah, there's later on in the game, there's like a whole zone.
There's a zone that's just full of those doors.
Yeah.
And I think unless you have a guide, don't open any of them.
Yeah.
It's designed to kind of prank you.
And I forget to like which, like in Elden Ring, there's enough Stone Sword keys that you can either find or buy that will, like, you can unlock everything. I don't remember if that was the case for
I don't think
Pharaoh's
so in
Lockstones.
2, yeah, because I think that's the thing about that zone is you can burn through all of your lockstones, and a lot of the doors are pointless.
Yeah, a lot of the doors, all they do is just add more enemies to fight you.
But the next main zone that you're supposed to go to is the Huntsman's Copse.
Yep. So you go, it's somewhere you get like, because this is like that weird turntable thing, and I forget where you get the key or whatever that does the turntable. It might be the Lost Sinner.
Yeah, you must have gotten it from like a boss in a previous zone.
Or maybe that's why you go to Forest of the Fallen Giants. I don't remember.
Yeah,
but essentially,
this is very much of the 3 Dark Souls games, the one that I'm like trying to recall.
Yeah. And even though out of the 3 Dark Souls games, this is the one that I've played the most. Like, I've run through it so much.
It's pretty convoluted.
There's a lot of just like, it's like that scene from like Fellowship of the Ring where Gandalf's just like, I have no memory of this place. Like, and I'm just like sitting here like, I don't remember, like, I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I just don't remember exactly how I'm supposed to. Like, I know I'm supposed to go here, but the door's locked, and I don't remember where I get the thing to unlock the door. So,
yeah.
But so you are able to unlock this door. You go to the Huntsman's Copse, which is a kind of poisony zone. I'm trying to remember. I don't feel like this zone was like super big.
Isn't this the the grassy kind of foresty zone, but it's nighttime?
Yeah. So this one is very reminiscent to Dark
Root Basin.
That one.
Yeah.
Where it's this kind of foresty thing, and then it ends with the chariot fight, right?
It ends with the Skeleton Lord, which, yes, I think is the... No, I don't think that's the Skeleton Lord.
Oh, you're right. The Skeleton Lords are the dudes that are just like sitting on the chairs, aren't they?
So the Skeleton Lord, there are 3 lords that you fight, 2 of which are melee combatants, while the third uses pyromancy.
That's right.
Each skeleton lord spawns a different type of smaller skeleton when killed. Killing the one with the halberd will spawn normal small skeletons. Killing the one with the scythe will spawn slightly stronger.
I'm thinking of the next zone. Yeah. So this is the skeleton lords are a boss fight, but it is definitely one that feels like this could have just been like this one felt to me like these could have just been like kind of hard enemies.
Yeah,
then they promoted them to bosses by giving them health bars and making them not respawn, which I don't mind that they don't respawn. That's fine. But
yeah, it's just a room full of skeletons.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple big ones that like you hit to drop the health bar. It reminds me of Deacons of the Deep.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's that kind of boss fight.
Yes.
So yeah, the after the skeleton lord, you move on to Undead Purgatory.
Yes. So there's a big bridge that you can get to. Go across it, and this is where you fight Chariot Man, who rides around in a circle. And then you run to the end of the like track that he's on. Do something. Like you pull a lever and
he crashes.
And he crashes.
And does that take his health, or you can hit him when he's down?
I think it crashes him and lets you then hit him while he's down. I don't remember him like really having like a boss fight.
I was watching
you defeat him and then just be like, I'm gonna stab you.
Yeah. I was watching some of the Vati videos about this game and the lore around this boss, because it's such a bizarre boss just in general, but like some of the lore is apparently like the king was frustrated by the curse of the hollows, and so he would trap them in this arena to just be forever tormented by this chariot.
Yeah.
It's like, that's messed up.
Like it's a weird, deep lore game if you care to like read all of the things or watch a video on it.
So then you move on to Harvest Valley, which has no boss apparently.
Yeah, this one is, I think it ends with Covetous Demon, which I think has a health bar. It's really just a big fat frog thing that can kill you, but like
this guide
telegraphs it pretty hardcore.
This guide has Covetous Demon under the Earthen Peak, but
yeah, I think it's like the first area of Earthen Peak. And so you basically have to kill it at the end of Harvest Valley, maybe?
To get into Earth, yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, then Earthen Peak.
Yeah, Harvest Valley is just the traditional poison area.
Yeah, classic.
And then Earthen Peak kind of continues the poison area, but adds in some fun little platforming as well.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And in Earthen Peak, there's like a random thing that you can do by like lighting a windmill on fire that like the boss of Earthen Peak, which is who?
Baneful Queen Mithra.
Yes. So the boss of Earthen Peak is, you fight her in a pool of poison, which sucks. But then if you light the windmill on fire, for some reason that like goes down and burns the poison that is in her boss arena back, so that you have a safe place to stand.
Yeah, this is one of the things I was watching, like a kind of video essay thing on Dark Souls 2, and
yeah,
this was one of the
H-Bomber guy.
No, I don't think it was.
Okay, because that one is great.
I can't remember who it was, but this is one of the things they brought up of like, somehow you're supposed to know that you can burn this windmill by doing this thing that's very obtuse, and it doesn't look interactable, and it's very...
I forget if there's like some random like cryptic message FromSoft left on the ground that we were supposed to just intuit meant, oh, burn this windmill.
Yeah, maybe in Scholar they put a little more direction.
Yeah, or maybe I feel like there was if you were online, like you could touch like a blood stain or something and it would show somebody like burning it or something like that. But like if you're playing online, you don't know that you're supposed to like you've seen so many bloodstains that are pointless at this point that you're just like, okay, I'm not.
Yeah, the entire hallway opening up into Majula is full of bloodstains, and it's like, how does that even? I don't understand how that's
exactly. How did you manage to kill yourself here? I don't.
It's like how there's all those bloodstains in the Hunter's Dream, and it's like, I don't. Why? How?
Yeah. But she's not really like a hard fight, like especially if you burn the poison, which at this point every guide, if you're following a guide, is like go burn the poison. Like the poison part is kind of her hard part of the fight. So you kill her, and then it transforms into a lava zone.
Yeah. Then you like
this is where it really becomes apparent that the zones, even though like you walk from one to the other, make no logical sense.
Yeah, it's where you could see that they kind of had like ideas for areas and then had to just kind of connect them.
Yeah, because you go upstairs. The game.
Yeah, this was the thing where it was like, oh, you go from here and then you go up like an elevator or whatever, and then you're up in the sky in a lava zone.
Yeah.
Which makes absolutely no sense if you look at the map of the world.
Exactly.
It's also a pretty tough area. From my recollection, some of the bosses. This is one of the areas where I had a pretty cool and interesting interaction with just a random person that like joined my world to help me.
Yeah,
and we're like going through, and we're fighting, getting through the mobs, and then he like goes to roll and accidentally rolls off the ledge and into the lava and dies. And then I get a message on my Xbox that was like, "My bad, bro. Sorry." And I'm like, "You didn't have to." Shoot me a message. You didn't have to say anything. It's all good.
Yeah.
But it was like cool that you did.
It kind of goes in the face of the typical vision you have of Dark Souls players that are like, oh, just get good, scrub. You're not even playing the right way if you're summoning.
Yeah. There's two sides to the like Souls community. And a lot of the Souls community is pretty like welcoming and helpful, but again, it's that kind of like silent majority versus vocal minority.
Exactly.
But yeah, you go through, you explore a bunch of lava stuff. Thankfully, it's not like Dark Souls 1 where you have to like run through the lava continuously. It's more like if you fall in, you're in trouble kind of lava. And then you fight the smelter demon.
Yeah.
Is kind of like the optional side thing. Like,
yeah, if you fight the smelter demon, you unlock a shortcut.
And that's a tough fight because it's in a tiny room.
Yeah, it's in a very tiny room, and if you don't summon, he's not terrible to fight if you have summons because he splits his time back and forth.
But he's very aggressive and he hits like a truck.
Yeah. But he hits in front of him. He doesn't have like a bunch of big like sweeping AoE type of things, really, I don't think.
Yeah, so if you can divide his attention, you can kind of whittle him down.
And then, so you kill him, you get a shortcut, and then you go further. This is another one of those zones that just felt like it had a lot of space in between its bonfires. This is also the first zone that I remember there being a mimic. In some of the like area, like parts where you climb up, there is a mimic. And I could be completely misremembering, but there were two chests, and I think they switched which one was the mimic in Scholar of the First Sins. I could be completely wrong on that.
Sounds like something.
Maybe it was just the couple of years in between playing the original and Scholar that made me forget which chest was the mimic because I knew one of them was. But yeah, there are some mimics here.
I feel like Dark Souls 1 and 2 used mimics like appropriately sparingly for the most part.
Yeah.
And then 3 was like every other chest is a mimic. 3 they went a little overboard.
Yeah.
With their mimic use, but
yeah, I mean they used them all. They couldn't put any into Elden Ring. They burned them all in Dark Souls 3.
Yeah, I guess mimics are just a Dark Souls thing because they're not in Bloodborne or Elden Ring. I don't think they're in Demon Souls. Can't remember. Pretty sure they're not. It's just a Dark Souls thing. But yeah. So you're talking about the back half of Iron Keep.
Yeah.
Which eventually you get to the old Iron King.
Yeah. Because there is a bonfire that is closer to the old Iron King, but it's also up a very long ladder. And it's also in like, eventually you hit this part where it's like, there are all these like fire traps that you have to like make your way through. It's like a spinning X of fire that you have to like slowly walk through the like revolving door of fire.
You can turn it off, can't you?
Yes. So like if you climb to the top, I think you can turn off most of the fire. But so you eventually, and that one is slightly closer to the boss than the other one that you were running from. And the boss of this zone is the Old Iron King, which is a really cool fight, but also a bit frustrating just because of the arena that it is in. It is a giant man with big hands that like attacks you, kind of like a Andros situation. And so like he'll like wind up and slam his hand down, and you'll have to run in and like hit his hand a bunch, and then he'll, back off or whatever. That's how you like take him down. But you're on like a tiny platform in the middle of this massive lava lake.
I very vaguely remember this boss. This one doesn't stand out in my mind.
We co-opted this boss and we did it in one take.
Okay, that must be why.
Yeah. Because it's a frustrating boss if you, just because of the run back, and also like there's a hole in the arena that you can accidentally roll into.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And so like that's the main part that sucks about it. But the boss himself like is pretty much just like I'm going to wind up for like 3 seconds before slamming it down. So like if you get hit by this, it's kind of your fault.
Right.
Kind of boss.
So then that's like your next King Soul, right?
Yes, that's your next like King Soul. It's also the entrance to one of the DLCs. The place you can go after that, I think, lets you into one of the DLCs.
Yeah, I think that was the DLC that broke me, that made me be like, yeah, I'm not playing this DLC.
Yeah.
It's the DLC where the Fume Knight is.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, DLC spiked up like crazy for this game and was...
Well, and they also let you into it so early into the game when it really is like end game stuff.
Yeah, but I went to it end
at
game
the end,
and was still like, man, this is brutal.
Yeah.
So I ended up, any DLC that I've attempted for FromSoft games so far, like I've gotten through except for 2.
Yeah.
I've either not played it or I've gotten through it except for 2.
Yeah. And 2's DLCs are just like, they're good, but also it's just like they just tried to be frustrating.
Yeah, they were just really tough. So yeah, then you go to Belfry Soul, which does not have a boss.
Yeah, this is another one of the get summoned ones. Like it's a PvP area. And yeah, I don't think it has a boss. It might have like more gargoyles or some shit, but I think maybe it's just like an invader or something. But you ring a bell. Like that's the goal, is you run through the zone and you ring a bell.
Then you head to the Shaded Woods.
Yes. Which is an interesting zone. Because like walking through it initially, you get to like this misty area.
Yeah.
And there are a bunch of like, if you're playing the game, especially online, you'll see like sort of ghostly outlines of other players occasionally in the game.
Yeah.
Kind of showing you what they do. And then in this zone, they have NPC enemy ghostly outlines that will come up and stab you in the back.
Yeah.
And they put it in a misty area so that those white ghostly outlines blend in with the mist so that you can't see them. And so this is another one where they were playing with the dark and the light, because the way to see them, the way to find them, is that you hold a torch,
right,
and then they cast shadows. And so then you can be like, that's real, that's trying to attack me, let me kill it.
I think I just ran through attacking anything that I saw. I was also, like, for my first playthrough, I was sword and board. So, like, I just had shield up like, the whole time. You know?
Yeah.
Hide behind that shield.
And I want to say, too, like, I don't remember there being anything, like, you had to pick up. Like, there's obviously, like, you know, if you explore the whole zone, there's probably some, like, weapons or armor or something that you can find in there. but there's nothing that like you needed to have in
No,
that area. So you can kind of just run through it and be like, I'm done.
I explored it, and there was like some huts and stuff you could drop in that had different items. But yeah, I don't remember there being anything like
there
super
wasn't
essential.
I don't remember there being like a Estus flask upgrade or something.
Or like a key to progress or anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So you get through this, and then you go to the Shaded Ruins, which has a bunch of like curse jars in it. And also a bunch of lion people, which is kind of weird. And then 2 scorpion people, which is not a lot of scorpion people, but more than you would expect.
Yeah, Dark Souls 2 really felt like they just had a bunch of ideas, and instead of cutting some and really like refining the rest, they just put them all in there.
Yeah, they're like,
let's put everything in there and just
connect it to
stitch it together.
Yeah, we'll create a weird hallway with some stairs, and they'll connect.
Exactly.
This is also where you find like the boss soul vendor.
Oh, right.
I think she's like petrified or something, and if you free her or him, I don't remember what it is.
Yeah.
It's a bird person. But you free them, and then in a later zone you find them again, and they'll transform your boss souls into weapons.
Good to have.
Yes.
So then you fight Scorpioness Najka.
Yes.
Is the boss.
And there's a way that you can like talk to the other scorpion and like be able to summon him or do something.
Yeah, I remember there being like NPC interactions for this area, but I can't remember exactly what I feel like
there's a
it had
ring
to do with the other scorpion.
Yeah, there's a ring that you have to wear, and if you wear it, you can understand him.
Mm-hmm.
And then based on that, you're able to like, he either gives you something that helps you defeat her, or he like agrees to be summoned or something. I forget exactly what it is. I think it was several runs through the game before I knew about that, because when I played this game, it was way before you could easily look up walkthroughs on your phone.
Right.
Like this was still in the early days of that.
After that, you end up in the zone we referenced earlier, the Doors of Pharos, where it's like an underground zone that all the different Pharos doors are everywhere. Other than that, I don't remember it being super remarkable. There's some like heavy, like some big enemies I remember that can like...
They're elephant people.
That's right. They were elephants.
And I got this, like my first playthrough, I got one of their big great swords, and that was the weapon that like carried me through the end of the game.
You fight a really stupid boss.
Yeah.
In this zone.
It's the Royal Rat Authority. Is this the one that's like...
It's just a bunch of rats?
Is that the one? Or is it the big rat that's essentially just a dog?
It might be the big rat dog.
Yeah, I think this one's the big rat dog, which has... Yes, this one, they call it a rat.
It's like a big dog.
But it has basically the moveset of the dogs in FromSoftware games.
Yeah.
And it's annoying. Because it's jumping around a bunch, and if you stand under him, I think it like poisons you.
Yeah, I remember there being... Well, I feel like I remember there being like if you could get under him, you would have it was one of those you're better off not locking on and trying to stay under it kind of fights.
It was not stellar, but also I think it was optional. It might not have been optional. You might have had to beat it to like progress, but it wasn't like hard. I think the worst part was you had to run back to it. But again, if you died a bunch, eventually the run back was empty. So yeah, that was the big rat thing. And then you go into the Brightstone Cove Telsadora. Seldora.
There you go. Probably Seldora.
The zone was weird. It's like a deserty zone.
Oh, yeah. This probably is like the main zone that like when I think Dark Souls 2 that like pops in my head, because it's so odd. It's just like, oh, we need a desert zone for our video game. So here it is.
Yeah, it is a deserty zone with a bunch of crystals. It has one of the weird bosses because it has the what was it called? It's like you enter this room and it's like the Prowling Magus. You enter this room and there's just a bunch of like peasant NPCs around, and then there's like this one just regular mage NPC around. And so it has like 2 health bars. One of them is like the mage NPC, and then one of them is the congregation, which is just like the regular old enemies.
Yeah.
And so you run in there and like the enemies are dying in like one hit. And so it's just like you're taking massive chunks off of this health bar. And it's got a health bar, so it's a boss. But it's also just kind of like, this was just a room of dudes. Like, this didn't have to be a boss. This is the one that gets the most shit for them just being like, not everything has to be a boss from some.
Yeah, the IGN guy doesn't even mention that.
Yeah. Like, it doesn't list him as a boss. It is technically a boss.
It has a health. Yeah, it's like, oh, we're going to put a health bar on this just so it'll be a boss. Yeah, ironically, after traversing the like Egyptian style, deserty, Indiana Jones caves exploring kind of level,
yeah,
you fight a giant spider.
Yes. That is also the Duke's wife somehow. Don't know how. I watched a video on it at some point. And that's a weird fight. That's
yeah, doesn't it? It summons little spiders, right?
Yeah, it summons some little spiders. And then it also has like 2 heads, one on each side or something like that. But I think you can like break one of them, or
it's like FromSoft. Well, it's like the directors of this game looked at Dark Souls 1 and they're like, okay, so everybody's exploiting the iframes, adaptability.
Yeah.
Everybody's exploiting backstabs, give the bosses 2 heads, like.
Yeah. Like it was a weird one. And then she does like this big like laser move.
Yeah.
Where she like spins around and shoots some lasers or whatever. It was weird. It was weird.
It was weird. It was a big, like massive spider, like
huge,
giant spider, not like the spider in Dark Souls 1. This is like bigger than Amygdala. Like this is a big spider.
And it was another awful boss run. So if you died to it, you had to run through like half the level to get back to it.
And didn't you have to do like some Souls platforming, like some drops?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because they're like you ran through these big spider webs.
Yeah.
To get to it. So that sucked. And then right after that, you go into the Grave of the Saints, which is where you fight
that's where
all the little rats.
Yeah.
Where one of them is special.
The Royal Rat Vanguard.
Yes. So there's like just a bunch of rats that continuously keep spawning in a room, but one of them is special. And if you kill the special rat, they all stop. Such a weird fight.
Not everything needs to be a boss.
No.
But that's just kind of like your classic sort of underground catacombs level.
Yes.
If I remember correctly. And then you end up in the gutter.
Yeah. So I guess the Grave of Saints is down the well. I had forgotten about that.
Yeah.
So the well that we talked about in Majula, you drop down that. And then the first zone you get to is the Grave of Saints. You can technically drop down it sooner, but it hurts you when you drop, and so you need a certain amount of health.
You need a certain amount of health
or
the ring, yeah.
To be able to safely drop.
Yeah.
And so you get there, you go through the Grave of the Saints where you kill the rats, and then you're in the gutter, which is another poison zone.
Love it.
And this is the like sort of ramshackle wooden structure.
Yeah.
With a bunch of poison in it.
Your Blight Town.
Yeah, basically Blight Town 2.0. Everything kind of looks very samey, and so that can make it confusing.
Oh yeah, I remember this one.
There's some platforming, which is always just the most fun to do. And then you eventually get to like the first bonfire in the area. And then I don't think there's a boss related to the gutter.
No, this isn't showing a boss. The next boss is in Black Gulch, which is like an extension of the gutter, except more poisony. And this is where the like statues that shoot poison or toxin or whatever at you are.
Yeah.
And eventually, after navigating this cesspit, which I remember this kind of being one of my least favorite areas in the game.
Yeah, it's a very short area.
Yeah.
but it is very annoying. There are just a bunch of pools of acid with like these big monsters that'll jump out of them.
But I kind of grouped like the gutter and Black Gulch together. But yeah.
You can set the pools of poison on fire.
Again, playing with the torch mechanic.
Yeah. And so that helps. And it also kills the things that are in it.
But you do get to fight one of the easier bosses in the game.
Yes.
The easier, like, king bosses anyways.
Yeah.
In the Rotten.
Yeah. He is kind of just like a big, slow mass of
blob.
corpses.
Yeah, he reminds me kind of like the Phalanx from Demon's Souls. Just kind of like a big blob that, like, you can get caught in and it'll do some damage, but if you're playing smart, you're probably going to get it on your first try.
Yeah, because he hits hard, but he's also not... He's very readable and predictable and slow. So, like, you can very easily kind of, like, get out of his way. I think he also unlocks another...
I was going to say, I think
DLC
that's another
area.
DLC path.
And in this zone, too, you can, like, drop down to an area and start kind of working on, like, the Dark Lurker. The Pilgrims of the Dark areas. So there's like a secret annoying boss in Dark Souls 2. And there's like 3 areas that you kind of have to like drop down and work your way through. And then once you've done all 3 of them, you can like fight him. Which I did in the original game. I have not done it in Scholar of the First Sin just because I hated fighting him in the original game.
Who is that?
Dark Lurker. He teleports around and makes copies of himself and has a lot of magic. And if you are a melee character, it's just a very annoying fight. And pretty much everybody was a melee character in Dark Souls 2. And I don't think you could summon for him either. Like, I don't think there was the option to do it because he was like a secret boss in an area that didn't let you summon or something. But it starts in like Black Gulch. I think there's one in the Shaded Ruins, but I think that's where you go like to fight him at the end. Like, I think you have to do the one in Black Gulch and then one in Drangleic Castle before you come back to Shaded Ruins. I could be wrong on that though. But it was an interesting... It's worth looking up to watch the fight or something.
Right. Maybe not worth seeking out necessarily.
Yeah. Like when I played through it originally on my game, I wanted to do it because I wanted to keep playing Dark Souls 2, and I found out about it, and the DLC wasn't out yet. And so it was like, yes, I want to go like try to fight this thing. And it was a fun time for that. But now I was like, no, I don't feel like dealing with this at this point. It's something I may eventually go do, but nah. So at this point, you've got 4 Lord Souls. You've got all 4 of them. So you can now open
Drangleic Castle. Then kind of head into like the back.
Yeah, the back
third of the game. Yeah.
So Drangleic Castle is kind of just like your traditional castle-y area. Like, I don't remember there being
it was pretty cool. It felt like classic. Like, if again, the castle-y stuff I enjoy in Dark Souls, so I remember really liking this level and exploring it, and I don't remember there being... I mean, there's some tough enemies and some BS, and like you get anytime that night type enemies can be introduced in a Dark Souls game, they're probably gonna be pretty tough. But yeah, this area was really cool. I think the whole thing was kind of like set at night too, so it's all like really dark, moonlit,
and like stormy.
Yeah. You end up fighting the Dragon Riders.
Yes. So the Dragon Riders, you fight 2 of them here instead of just 1. You fought like 1 earlier in the game. So that's always fun.
Gotta love a double.
Yes. And one of them is like a ranged character until you kill the first one. So the entire time, like, you're fighting the first guy, he's just like sniping at you from a distance.
Yeah, and then he'll jump down when you kill his buddy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that sucks. Also, throughout the whole game, we haven't like mentioned everywhere that Pursuer shows up, but 2 of them show up in the castle at the same time. That's fun.
Yeah.
And then the Chariot boss is back in the castle somewhere. That wasn't in the original game. That threw me for a loop when that showed back up. I was like, what is this?
Yeah, that's rude.
Yeah. But yeah, you fight your way through and you find like Vendrick, right? Is that you eventually get to? No.
No, it's a little bit. So you
Okay.
go to the King's Passage next.
That's right.
And that's where eventually you fight the Looking Glass Knight.
Yes.
Who is the one with like the mirror shield thing?
Yeah, that was a super cool fight.
Yeah.
So because you go to like that's a different part. So the Looking Glass Knight has a shield that is a mirror, basically.
Yeah.
And partway through the fight, he summons like an NPC. Except like he summons an NPC now, except for back in the day, he used to summon players out of his shield to fight you in the middle of the fight, which sucked. But it was also kind of cool because I think it was just pulling like anybody, or maybe there was like a ring or like a special item that you had to like equip to be summoned by him. But it was basically like once you fought him and beat him, you entered the pool to be summoned by him. And so that was kind of like a neat little, or I think maybe you could like go and put your like invade sign down in his zone or something. I forget exactly how it worked, but there's a way that you could make him summon you. But that was like, that fight was really cool too, because it happened in like a lightning filled night. But that was a pretty small area too of that, like, of Drangleic Castle. And then you get to the Shrine of Amana, because he was guarding it, which has a bunch of singing maidens that are putting a bunch of the enemies to sleep. But when you get close to them, they stop singing and the enemies wake up. And also the entire zone is flooded.
Oh, yeah.
And so it is hard to walk through. And it's hard to see where the random cliffs that they've added. I think in our last episode, we talked about the Hydra fight, and this is basically a whole zone that was the Hydra fight.
Yeah.
So that was annoying. But then you get to the end, and it's like this weird frog thing that has hands, and when it opens its mouth up, there's a face there.
Yeah, one of the weirder bosses, for sure.
Very weird boss design, but also not a terribly hard fight. And this zone is also like pretty easy to just kind of like run through and get to the boss, which then allows you to get down to the Undead Crypt, which is where Vendrick is. It reminds me a lot of that zone, like the Tomb of the Giants sort of zone,
right,
from Dark Souls 1. It is very reminiscent of any of the crypts that you go into in Elden Ring.
Yeah, a lot of like just kind of exploring the just like concrete, cold walls and darkness, and very kind of tense and not quite as obnoxious as a Sen's Fortress, but like you still feel like you never know what's going to be around the corner.
Yeah, like it's got some traps in it. It's got a bunch of like skeletal enemies in it. It's not terrible. And then eventually you get to like the Queen's Guard, like Velstad or something. The Bell Knight, I want to say.
Yeah.
And he's not too bad. He kind of feels like just another kind of big enemy.
Yeah, it's like if you're patient and you are smart with your like attack windows, you could probably take him down. I remember that being a pretty satisfying fight. In just how...
Yeah, I was going to say, it's one of the ones that I have a clip of you doing.
Yeah, I clipped it out because I like felt like that fight flowed pretty well.
Yeah, I was going to say, out of all of the fights in Dark Souls 2, that is one that feels like a traditional Dark Souls boss fight.
Exactly.
Like there's a bunch of just weird stuff that they do, and then there's that one, which is like, this is weird because it feels so normal. And then you get to, like, beating him allows you to access King Vendrick, who lore-wise became hollow and so locked himself away so that he didn't, like, hurt anybody. Or maybe the queen locked him away. I forget exactly what it was. But he's, like, not hostile to you.
Right.
initially, but you have to kill him to get his ring, because now you've run up to the point where it's like, I've done everything that I can. I need this ring to unlock the remaining like 3 doors in the game.
Yes.
And so he's got an interesting mechanic where you can just fight him right then, but he has a ton of like damage resistance because something in the lore is like he killed all the giants or whatever, and so like he has absorbed all of their strength.
Yeah. So basically he would just destroy you.
Yes, so he destroys you, and he's got like, when you hit him, if you haven't done the necessary steps, you do like no damage to him. So you can like technically, like if you get good, you can
Yeah.
whittle him down, but also technically you can beat the entire game with a broken straight sword, so shut up. So at this point, you get the ability to like jump into memories.
Yes.
And so you go all the way back to Forest of the Fallen Giants, and there are 3 dead giants that you like go up and touch, and then you're able to like get into their memories.
Yeah, and you go back and see kind of like the war between the giants and...
Yeah. And then you fight the last giant boss fight 3 more times. I think. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's like the last giant boss.
Yes. Except there's like, I remember one of them was a bit more gimmicky with like you're getting shot at and stuff like that.
Yeah. So there's like 3 of them there. And then maybe he just gives you the king's ring. Maybe you don't even have to kill him. Did you have to kill him? Now I'm doubting myself. I know I always killed him, but now I'm like, did you have to?
Yeah, either way, yeah, you either can talk to him or fight him. But yeah, I can't remember exactly.
Okay, so I'm reading the thing. So there's just some like stuff on the ground in his room. So he doesn't attack you. And so you can just run past him and grab it. And one of the things is his ring. So you can use his ring to then unlock the other places. But this is also the point where you can go back and like weaken him and fight him and kill him. But you technically, I don't think, have to kill him. Anyway, 3 of the souls are Forest of the Fallen Giants. I think there's like 1 in Black Gulch somewhere.
Yeah.
And then there's another in the Dragon Shrine, which is another zone that you can now access. So this entire time, like, you've been hearing about Aldea, which is the scholar of the first sin, the titular, like,
yeah,
that is who he is. And so you're able to unlock a door now using the king's ring to go to his manor, where he's got a bunch of like beasts locked up, and also a giant dragon skeleton that like jump scares you and attacks you and kills you like the first time you walk into his manor. So you kind of walk in, go through his manor. There's no like boss in his manor until you get to the end of his manor, where he keeps a dragon locked up in a big cage, like a big bird cage thing.
Yeah.
And so you kill that dragon, and then you gain access to the longest elevator that just goes up to the Dragon Shrine, which is where just all of the enemies are dragons. Because like that one boss that you just fought, it's that all over again.
Yeah, I was confusing this area with Dark Souls 3.
Because there is another one in Dark Souls 3 that is basically this area. Yeah.
But there's so much more like interaction with dragons and fighting them in 2 that I kept expecting. I was like, oh, I remember this area was really obnoxious. And then when I was playing 3, I was like, oh yeah, that was 2. This is better. This is the one where you just drop on top of a dragon's head and insta-kill it. Not the one where you have to like explore around and there are sleeping dragons everywhere, right?
Yeah, because I was wrong. You don't get the ability to jump into dreams and get the giant souls until you go through this area.
Ah.
That is why you go through this area, because at the end of this area there's an ancient dragon that you can just go and talk to.
The really big one?
Yes, the really big one. And he gives you that ability.
That makes sense.
To go do that.
Another optional fight.
Yeah.
I did not fight him.
I have beaten this game at least 6 times. I have never fought this boss. Well, I have never won against this boss. I have fought this boss.
Right.
And it's miserable. You fight him on a platform in the air. He does a move where he blows fire directly down at the platform, and it pretty much doesn't matter where you're standing. It takes so much of your health every single time.
Yeah, I don't think you're necessarily supposed to. It's like if you choose to fight him, you better be ready.
Exactly. But he gives you the ability to go get the giant hearts or the giant souls, and those weaken Vendrick.
So you can put him out of his misery.
So at this point, you have done everything you need to do to get to the end of the game. And so at this point, did you beat like the final boss and get to Nishandra first? Or did you go into the DLCs?
I did. So there's Sin the Slumbering Dragon, that DLC. We did that one co-op. I remember us playing through a lot of that together. There's the one I mentioned earlier with the Fume Knight.
Because they were each called like the Crown of the whatever. So there's like the Crown of the Old Iron King, the Crown of the Sunken King, and the Crown of the...
Wasn't the other one where you go to like a zone where you can't see anything? It's like super foggy or snowy.
Sunken King, yes, Ivory King. That's the other one.
So
where you start in the frozen world.
Yeah, I didn't even do Ivory King at all. I tried to do Iron King and gave up. And you and I did Sunken King together.
Yeah.
We did that like in the middle of the playthrough. Like we did it kind of as it came up. The other two, like I tried to do Iron King at the end, and then I didn't even bother with the other one after dropping Iron King.
Yeah. Yeah, because the difficulty of the DLCs ramps way, 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 way up.
Yeah.
They do have some cool fights. They do have some memorable bosses, but also, like, again, the difficulty just ramps way up.
And also in Dark Souls 2, there's just so many areas, and at this point you're like level 456 or whatever, that I was just kind of like, I feel like I've played enough Dark Souls 2 at this point. I'm good. Like,
yeah. They have this weird mechanic in the game where you can like reset an area.
Right.
And so like, I personally feel like the DLC was like just cranked way up because they wanted you to like use that mechanic.
Yeah, or because they assumed that people had been doing that, waiting for the DLC to come out.
Exactly.
I never did that once.
Yeah.
I never used that mechanic.
Yeah, because like normally when you do like a New Game Plus, it like resets the entire world. This was a way to New Game Plus a zone, like a single zone, and increase the difficulty to get more souls and to get more like items and stuff. There are some items that only appear on higher levels of the world. And so this is a way that you could like New Game Plus that zone so that you could unlock that. Also, this game, I don't think any of the other Dark Souls games do this. But when you New Game Plus this game, it changes enemies. Like it adds new ones to the game and moves them around. I don't know.
3 does a little bit of that.
Yeah. I was going to say, I've only New Game Plus 3 once, and I don't know that I made it all the way back through that.
Yeah, I think just based on like the walkthrough I was following with 3, that he mentioned that like if you New Game Plus, there'll be some like different enemies and you can also find like new rings.
Yeah,
like,
I was gonna say
the only way to get all the rings is to go through New Game Plus.
Yeah, like I started my New Game Plus run of 3 with the intention of 100%ing that game, and then I was like, I fell off of it for a different game.
Yeah. So yeah, no DLC. I did some of it, not all of it, but
yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, I have no regrets dropping it. I feel like it was if I were to do it again, I would follow like a walkthrough and build like an optimized build throughout the whole game, and then go into the DLC with like an optimized build. Whereas when I went into it, I was just playing with my sword and board first playthrough character. I was just kind of like, I'm getting destroyed in here.
Yeah.
So
they're like cool zones. Like the one I remember the most is like the big underground city that seemed really cool.
Yeah, we did that one.
Yeah, that's the one we did together.
It has the gank fight.
Yeah.
Which is pretty stupid, but but I mean, FromSoft, they don't half-ass their DLC. Like,
no. That's why we're so excited about Shadows of the Erdtree.
Yeah. The potential for that DLC to essentially be Game of the Year this year is very high.
Yes, correct. Right after Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah, it came out last year.
Yeah, but I'm going to put it at the top
for the rest of the world. But yeah, I think we can move into the end game here. You fight, you go after...
Like, there is no other zone. Like, you just go back to Drangleic Castle, and there's a door you can open.
You go into the throne
Castle
room,
now.
yeah. And then it's not nearly as dramatic as 1 or 3, where like in 3 the world has inceptioned all over itself, and in 1 things are kind of falling apart. In this one, you just kind of follow a long pathway down, and you get into a room with a kiln.
Yeah.
And you fight like a double fight first, right?
Yeah, so they have the Throne Watchers that you fight first. And then once you kill them, I forget what happens, but you essentially just trigger another fight.
Yeah, the queen, Nashandra, comes out, and super easy boss, other than that she can like...
She uses curse. That's the main hard part about her, is that she can curse you, which... sucks.
Yeah. But her herself, really simple. I can't remember if they checkpoint it, or if it's a 2-phase where you have to fight the first 2 and then her every time. Because I remember them being a lot harder than her. Because really, curse is her only big deal. After that, either way, whether it's a 2-phase or not, you end up... This is where like your decisions and things you've made, you can kind of decide what your ending is going to be. And it's kind of like a cross between Dark Souls and Elden Ring, where in Dark Souls 1 and 3, you're either putting out the fire or you're rekindling the fire to kind of like continue the cycle.
Yeah.
In Dark Souls 2, you're essentially doing the same thing, except you are the fire.
Yeah.
And you're sitting on a throne inside the kiln. So it's like a little bit Elden Ringy there, or vice versa.
And I forget if there were multiple endings initially or not.
Yeah, I just kind of assumed there were because it's Dark Souls, but it might just be that, you're going in there and you're...
Like, I think there definitely are now. And also there's the Aldia fight at this point as well.
True, they added...
Which I don't know that I've ever done that part yet, because
I fought him.
Yeah.
But I don't remember if I did it after, if I went and did it after I beat the game, or if it affected anything. But yeah, I did fight him.
Yeah, because he is like a big face that kind of keeps just showing up several times throughout. I think you don't fight him until here. But he's basically like, good job for making it all the way. I forget what the lore is. I think he's maybe trying to like usurp you.
He's like manipulating you up to this point. Yeah. Or trying to.
Yeah. And I also, I think in Scholar of the First Sin, it doesn't auto start New Game Plus 2. I think in the original game it might have. So.
Oh, right.
I don't remember though.
Which again is one of those like interesting, seeing this game and Bloodborne being developed in parallel, because Bloodborne auto starts New Game Plus, but then Dark Souls 3 lets you make that choice. You beat the
boss, and then it's like, which of the 3 endings do you want?
Yeah. Well, and even after you pick your ending, you go back to Firelink, and it's like go to the fire when you want to start the new journey or whatever.
And Elden Ring's like that as well.
Yeah. So that's Dark Souls 2. You ready to move into our verdicts?
I am ready.
Cool. Well, let's go ahead and move into our verdicts for Dark Souls 2. So how we rate games on the Effing Gamers review scale is with the classic A through F scale. And the only difference is that there is an S grade above A, and S is for masterpiece. So between S being a masterpiece and F being hot garbage, Dylan, where would you put Dark Souls 2?
Like I talked about on the last episode, I think for me, all of these games are pretty much S tier for different reasons. And also, just nostalgia and general love for this series. So for me personally, I love it. This was my first full Dark Souls experience where I played through the entire game and then was like, that was awesome. Let me New Game Plus it. Played through it again. This holds a special place in my heart. And I also genuinely like, since I didn't put a ton of time into Dark Souls 1 or 3 before playing this game, all of the mechanics in this game were my first time really experiencing a lot of them. And so, going to like Dark Souls 3, it's like, oh, quality of life improvements versus like going back and playing this game and being like, interesting. I'm glad that they made these changes. So
yeah,
I really like a lot of the kind of just different things that they were doing with this game, a lot of the experiments that they were doing. I also personally feel like this is the Dark Souls game that there are frustrating things, there are things that make it difficult, but I also think that this is the one that is what I wish more FromSoft games would do. Like I think this out of all of them had the most ways to choose how difficult you wanted the game to be. Number one, going in, you were always at least making progress. Like if you were killing an enemy, even if it was just a regular little enemy, you were making progress because they only had a set number of times that they would respawn. So eventually, even if you were beating your head against a wall with a boss, eventually you were going to clear the run up to the boss. And so that you didn't have to like do any of the fights anymore. You could just get there. Number two, like I mentioned earlier, they have the rings that kind of allow you to ignore the main mechanic of Souls-like, which is when you die, you lose your stuff. Granted, that ring doesn't come until way, way later, and I forget if this version of the game changed it so that it
I don't
breaks
think you can
permanently,
repair it, yeah.
which is kind of a bummer. But they do give you multiple ones of
That's
those.
how 1 and 3 were for sure.
Well, that is how 1 and 3 were, but that was not how 2 was back in the day. I don't know if they've changed it.
Yeah.
And also, I thought this one, like if you want more iframes, like ramp up that adaptability, I've also been nailing the parries. I don't know why in this game.
Yeah, I do think the parry window is
generous.
pretty solid, yeah, in 2.
And so, like I said, I feel like this is the one that does the most for trying to make some things accessible without just completely negating the difficulty. It's like the game is still going to be difficult, but once you have proven that you know what to do with these basic enemies by beating them 15 times and killing them, it's like they're not there anymore,
Yeah, and I think
it also can encourage you to farm.
Yeah.
If like you're having a tough time, it's like, well, I know that these guys will stop spawning if I'm having a tough time,
Right.
so let me just farm them up. Which then you can, it's a kind of a backwards way of encouraging you to like increase your level because you're doing the easy fight to clear it out, and then you're increasing your souls.
The only problem with that is just that like the front end of the game is so much more difficult because
like that is the part that I dislike about it. I still think it's a fantastic masterpiece of a game, but that is the one part. It reminds me of like an XCOM game where like your first 3 missions in XCOM are just miserable slogs where you're going to have a bunch of people die. And then you unlock better armor and good guns. And it's like, yeah, now I'm going to have one person die every like 15 missions. That's very much how Dark Souls is, where it's like the first 3 zones are pretty rough. But once you get past them, it's like, okay, I've got the swing of this. I've got the stats. Like, I've got the weapons and armor. Cool. So yes, subjectively for me, I think this is S. Objectively, I can recognize that this is probably a B for a lot of people, just because there are a lot of weird little things that make this game kind of frustrating sometimes.
Funny you should mention a B, because I have nostalgia for Dark Souls 2 at this point. It's like I mentioned earlier in the episode, it's the Dark Souls game that like it was kind of my first solo exploring, learning about Dark Souls type game. And I really liked it. After playing through 1 and 3 recently, there are things that 1 does that I like a lot better. There are things that 2 does that I think are really interesting and that I like better. And so I feel like if I were to post those 2 side by side and compare them, they would kind of even out. And I gave 1 a B. So for me, I feel like Dark Souls 2 it gets maybe a slight little bump for my preference and nostalgia.
Yeah.
Which makes it like a stronger B leaning towards A, whereas Dark Souls 1 was a B leaning towards C.
Yeah.
But it's a really excellent, awkward game. Like there's just so many awkward points and rough edges that make it interesting, but can also just make it really kind of hard to get going. I feel like once you, like you said, once you get into it and get going and get some levels and get some gear and get some items and understand what the game wants from you, then you kind of snowball in and it only gets easier.
Yeah.
Which is kind of,
yeah, like by the end of the game, you're kind of just running through zones, destroying things.
Yeah, which is kind of unique for a FromSoft game, but also it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just the early game can be very frustrating, and I could see a lot of people just giving up on it before seeing what the rest of the game has to offer, and I think that there is a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, I think I'll go with a B, but just it's a very unique and interesting game, and I'm glad that we have it, and I'm also glad that FromSoft and Miyazaki didn't just like throw it to the wayside like they easily could have, and they took a lot of the good lessons and good things from Dark Souls 2 and brought them forward into Elden Ring and some of their future titles, and I think that's really cool to see.
Yeah. Because like there's a lot that works for it.
Yeah. And some of the things that didn't work in 2 just needed refined, and when kind of tweaked and refined and brought forward, work just fine. Like, you know, so I like 2. We've always kind of, ever since we started this show, we were playing Dark Souls 2 kind of at the time where it just finished it. We've always kind of joked about being a pro Dark Souls 2 podcast. So like we liked it even before it was cool to like it. So we're like Dark Souls 2 hipsters at this point.
Yes, exactly. Because it's like if you are, I think if you are not into Dark Souls or like Souls-like games, I think Dark Souls 2 would be maybe the toughest of them to get into.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that.
Because I think it has the roughest start, and I think that it has the most just kind of weird idiosyncrasies and the most like convoluted just like stuff that you have to go do in the game. And I feel like you can appreciate Dark Souls 1 because it's like that's where FromSoft came from.
Right.
And Dark Souls 3 feels like a very modern, streamlined game for the most part. Like in Elden Ring's wake, it's a little bit less so, but like it still feels really, really good. It feels like a more condensed Elden Ring with no jump to me. And so I think both of those
with
are
an asterisk.
Yeah.
But yes.
I think, we'll talk more about that in the next episode. That's your little preview. But I think Dark Souls 2 is probably the hardest one to get into, especially if you're not a huge fan of them. It's still really good. Like you were saying, you would probably put it above Dark Souls 1 in kind of like if you were just looking at those two, and I would do the same, you know?
Yeah. And I think a lot of that is personal bias. I know the kind of general consensus is that 1 ranks above 2 and probably 3 for a lot of people, but
also the back half of 1 is still very frustrating and tedious. So
yes. True that. Cool. Well, as far as housekeeping, you already alluded to it, Dylan, but next up we have Dark Souls 3. So be looking forward to that. We will be talking about Dark Souls 3 on the next episode. There will be a post in our Discord server. There's a specific channel, Dark Souls Month channel, where we will have posted and pinned, more than likely, some prompts / questions that we'd love to get your responses on for our upcoming community episode that we'll be doing at the end of the month. So please respond to those prompts. If you're not in our Discord and you want to be part of that, definitely jump in there. I may post.
Also, Dark Souls month is April 2024. So if you were listening to this outside of that window, disregard this.
Right, but I feel like you probably figured that out.
Yeah.
I may post those prompts and questions to our other social medias if I feel like we need a little bit more juice in the tank, but hopefully we can get enough in our Discord. Yeah. What about YouTube? What's going on for Dark Souls month on YouTube?
We will be re-ranking our FromSoftware, like one of the first videos that we did for this channel. And one of our first ones that actually kind of like took off a little bit that we were excited about was us sitting down and ranking, like doing our personal rankings of the FromSoftware games. At the time, Elden Ring wasn't out. At the time, Andrew hadn't played Dark Souls 1.
All the way through. I hadn't played Sekiro all the way through. And maybe had you I'd played Demon Souls.
Had you played Dark Souls 2 at that point?
Yeah.
Okay. So, but yeah, we had some gaps in our knowledge, which was fine. I still
our
mostly
YouTube
stand
channel.
by. Yeah, I still pretty much stand by my list. But we're going to re-rank them and kind of go back and look at them, especially in a post Elden Ring world.
And with our kind of new YouTube formula and structure for making videos.
Yeah, and kind of just remake that, see how our opinions have shifted with Elden Ring out now. So that's definitely coming out, but I forget if it's the first or the second video in Dark Souls month. And then I forget what the second video was.
Yeah, so we got some good stuff on YouTube.
Yes.
Coming up as well.
We have a Sea of Thieves video up there.
Yes, definitely.
If you
check that out.
If you are one of our fans that has a PlayStation
and you're curious about Sea of Thieves,
only a PlayStation, and you haven't like been in the Xbox ecosystem or played Sea of Thieves, and you're like, maybe I want to pick this up because it's coming to PlayStation at the end of April. But there's only like 2 pirate games, so we couldn't do a pirate games month for April. So there aren't 2, I know. Correct me in the comments.
I was going to say, you forgot about Sid Meier's Pirates.
Yeah, that is true. But yeah, if you're wanting to be like, hey, should I play Sea of Thieves? Check that out.
Yeah.
Maybe you will decide yes after watching it, or maybe you'll figure out, no, I don't think this game is for me after watching it. So
nice. Cool. Yeah. And along with the YouTube video of ranking all the FromSoft games, we'll be doing a much more in-depth conversation about those rankings on the podcast coming up as well too. So once we record our Dark Souls 3 episode, that doesn't mean that the fun ends there. We have our ranking and then our community episode to round out the month. So hopefully you are on board. Let us know in our Discord or on the YouTube comments if you watch / listen to the podcast on YouTube what you think of this kind of prototype month of content. Might be something that we revisit in the future for other series as well. But that is all for this episode on Dark Souls 2. Thank you all so much for listening, and praise the sun.